Good evening. Today I'm going to be releasing two episodes. This one is specifically about investing. It's kind of off the topic, but I think it's still important, especially in the world of today. So, welcome to my podcast. My name is Jonathan, the host of the podcast, Masculinity Uncovered. Yes, it's not specific about masculinity, but it is about future and legacy. So, here it goes. Now, my investment strategy, I kind of came about it by pure risk and more so luck. Unfortunately, I took more losses than I took wins. But even though I kind of survived the worst, I'm still feeling the effects from it. It's 4 years ago. To preface this, back in 2021, I discovered something called options trading. And people will obviously say it's too risky. I could go into detail as to why people who don't really understand how options trading works, how they actually are more sustainable and more future long-term projection than just set and forget. But let me first say this. Back in 2021, I thought it was smart, it was right before COVID. I took out a bunch of personal loans because I learned a little bit about options investing, right? Options trading. So I started doing all kinds of things, especially iron condors. And essentially, what you're doing with iron condors, if you don't know, there's a bunch of videos out there, but you're making sure that the price stays in this range, right? And so I was thinking, hey, I'm just going to buy a bunch of iron condors, rinse and repeat every third day, because at that point, Robinhood was only offering every other day on the biggest ETF, like the Spider, the SPDR, and the QQQ. So I was like, yeah, man, I'm just gonna max this Iron Condor. And then the crash came. Oh, I lost a lot of money. It was absolutely ridiculous. And just to understand this, right? If you invest in something like Iron Condor, you have to understand you're losing 100 to potentially gain $10. It's a 10% game when you win, right? But the problem is when you do lose, you really lose. It can catch you off guard. I didn't know about risk mitigation. I just jumped into the gun. I was making a crap ton of money. I was making like $2,000 a week with $60,000 in from personal loans. May I add? I mean, my monthly payment was like 1,400. I was like, I can pay this off easy. That was the plan, right? So I ended up kind of quitting, right? I had to pay it off. Fortunately, I had a stable job that had enough income to pay for where I was living and um and the uh the loans, right, per month. And unfortunately, the loans were 5 years to pay it off, so it took a while to pay off. Not gonna lie, I was early though, but I ended up paying it off. I would say I lost about half before I decided to quit. Total, so about 30 grand left. I ended up investing in a bunch of single stocks that actually maintained, and I still hold them right now in my Roth IRA in Robinhood, right? And those are essentially long-term investments. But as I started to think about what the errors were in options contract, I started to really delve deep into what really is option contract, right? An option contract is basically the assurance that you make a certain amount of money depending on how the stock, the ETF, the index fund performs. So, for example, if you're trying to make sure that the stock doesn't go below a certain number and you put a bunch of insurance on that, that's basically what it is, right? You're trying to make sure it doesn't go below that, so you keep the stocks that you got. This is simple options investing, right? So you keep the income through a form of insurance from the person who is buying from you, but you're hoping that the stock doesn't depreciate too much, because when it does that, you're going to have to sell it, right? Or hey, maybe you want to sell it. Who knows? It doesn't matter, right? So you're trying to get that. And then on the opposite hand, right? Let's say you have the shares and you want it to appreciate, but you don't want it to appreciate too much because you don't want to lose them, right? So to speak. So you end up making money, technically called credit, right? They give it to you early on, but the aftermath is if it essentially falls out of bounds from your parameters, you end up getting rid of it. But let's say you do a simple covered call, right? Which is you own 100 shares, you have one contract of a specific stock, and you make credit on that. Now, what ends up happening is you get whatever that credit is. Let's say it's $100 for that specific contract 30 days in the future. So, as this was happening, I was thinking, I started to research what is the safest way to do option contract. Now, here it is. In order to do option contracts effectively, almost 80 to 90% in effectiveness, you have to really think about one thing and one thing only. You really need to own the shares. If you cannot own the shares, I wouldn't personally recommend getting into option contract because you have more risk, you have more to lose than to gain. You can do something called the poor man's covered call, which is you don't own the shares, but you're owning something called the leaps, which is 2 years in the future, with the hopes that it appreciates rapidly to a certain point, and then you sell the future and the present, and you get a shit ton of money. I did that as well, by the way. It's called a poor man's covered call. I made a crap ton of money. I am not gonna lie, but same thing happened. When it went negative, I lost a lot of the gains that I made. So it was a very disappointing experience. But what I did learn again is that those strategies are betting on no risk, because when you risk it all in that certain move, you really tend to lose it. And that's one of the biggest problems. So then I stumbled upon the same old option contract, which is own the shares and sell a credit against it. Let me explain. Let's say you have Apple. Apple is trading at $100, but you want to make at least 10% a month, right, on that stock. How do you do that? Well, you sell a covered call, meaning that you're saying, hey, I'm hoping, Apple does not reach 110 by next month, 30 days, right? And, for the first month, nothing happens. It stays below 110, and you make a credit of, I don't know, $100, right, as an example. So then you're like, oh crap, I'll rinse and repeat the strategy. So you do it the next month again, right? But this time, unfortunately, it goes past 110 on closing time, right? And you unfortunately have to sell the stocks, and you're like, oh bummer, I should have let it grow faster. That is true, but hear me out. You've had 2 months and you made $100 the first time and $100 the second time because you sold, right? You decided to sell the contract if it reaches past a certain point. So you did make about $200, hypothetically speaking, plus the value that you put it. So let's say you own the shares at 100. So 100 times 100, that's 10,000, right? So you made 10,200. Now this is what you do. You have to consider the possibility that the stock will fall again. Now, this is a long-term play. You have to understand this, right? Let's say that you're like, you know what? I'm just going to hope that it falls below 95, right? In the future. And then I'll buy them again at 95. And fortunately enough, 6 months later, market crash, it went to 75. You're like, oh shit. I just wasted a shit ton of money. That is true. But remember, you're thinking about this from a long-term perspective, long-term investing, right? And you're like, this stock will appreciate in the future. Usage, popularity, demand, there's all kind of things for this company, right? And then you're like, okay, it's at 95. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I sell it for 10% above $95. So let's say it goes to, I don't know, 105, right? $105 per share. So same thing, you rinse and repeat. And this strategy is called the wheel strategy, because what you're doing is you're rinsing and repeating the process, right? Oh, by the way, if I didn't say it before, when you're expecting the stock price to fall down, you're essentially doing something called a call. You're selling a put, right? Meaning that you're expecting to go down, you collect the insurance, the credit from that, and then boom, rinse and repeat. So effectively what you're doing is you're collecting insurance with the hope that it appreciates and it depreciates, and you're collecting all this credit. Now, idealistically speaking, you want to do this in a retirement account because there's no taxes. If it is a Roth IRA, let me be specific. They'll charge you for putting the money into the Roth IRA, but they won't charge you on any of the gains. So now you put this in perspective as a retirement account and you do it in the most, let's say it's a total market index, right? Like the VTI or something like that. The premium is not great because technically those ETFs are really stable. But hypothetically speaking, let's say you have $1 million, you own like 20 contracts of total market index, right? And you can, hypothetically speaking, make from that $2,000 a month because you do contracts every 30 days. Extremely stable, right? That is $2,000 that you made from your retirement account that goes back into buying more shares of the total market. Does that make sense? This is technically the best way to invest. But you have to understand this. It's a cycle, right? You have to understand that you should never risk it. Hey, it's going to, I better buy now. No. Think about this from a long-term perspective. You're expecting it to drop a certain below. If it is now plus 20% on that year, bet minus 10%. I don't know. Something like that. You're doing this because you're trying to grow your money in your retirement account, right? So that's my advice in terms of what you should think about investing. A lot of people will tell you it's risky, but here's where the game gets very interesting. This is how millionaires make their money. Billionaires make their money, by the way. Billionaires, of course, buy life insurance policy and bet against it so they can have a shit ton of money extra. But besides the point, filthy rich people, like life insurance companies, are the biggest option contract holders in the world. So if you get a company like, let's say, one of the famous ones, Penn Mutual, right? They probably have daily option contracts worth $2 million. Easy, right? I mean, they hold assets north of 40 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And they're betting $2 million and they win 80% of the time doing the exact same strategy that I'm just telling you about. They're making a shit ton of money, right? So you have to put this into perspective to think, what could I do to increase my chances of having a more successful retirement account? Now, people will tell me again, isn't this risky? Yes, of course it's risky. And here's why. It's not necessarily that you'll lose your money. It's that you won't be able to time the market correctly. So there could be things that you're missing out on through regular investing. But the guarantee is that when you follow the strategy of betting against your own stocks, which is the total market index, right? And getting a credit from that and reinvesting into that, you're actually growing your account little by little. I mean, on a conservative estimate, I think it is completely possible to do 15% a year. Now, that doesn't sound crazy a lot, but if you consider with the average of 10% a year on the stock market, there's a bigger compound growth going on there. So consider that, think about the idea behind reinvesting in the retirement account. Let's say you have a lot of money, making the credit on the side. You could even pull some money from that. But personal advice, right? I know they'll tell you a disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor, but come on, anybody can technically be a financial advisor if they have a solid idea about how to manage finances. But my whole story about this is that I had to learn the hard way. I took the risk that nobody, in fact, everybody told me I shouldn't do, but I had a plan. I mean, I already kind of knew that it was going to go bad at some point, but I had to test it out. So here I am. Rant about money. But anyway, that's in regards to investing. That's probably the best piece of advice that I can give you. Now, the second part of investing that you probably should consider is, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't personally think real estate in the United States is actually a viable track. Too many people are investing in real estate without actually understanding the huge risks behind it. I used to own real estate. It is a massive headache. And the reason I say this is, even if you are profitable, you're going to get a massive bill one day that is essentially going to wipe out all of your years of profitable income. It doesn't matter how much you save. Shit could happen. Shit does happen. In fact, I don't even advise anybody who has money to invest in real estate to actually do it immediately. There's too much risk for little profit. Now, if you're cash rich and you don't give a shit, go ahead. But for the average people who think real estate is the way to go, be absolutely careful. Because let us say you have 500,000 and you have a multifamily that is 500,000 out there. You pay cash for it. You're making, let's say, 10 grand a month in cash, right? But your next repair in 2 years, right? Let's say it's 80 grand. After you pay all of your debts, the cash profit that you got from it may be 75K. And then you have to fork 5 over, right? Yes, there's different strategies you can use, but you're introducing a bunch of risk that sometimes can get really bad, right? I mean, there's stories about these people who had a perfect plan and ended up screwing themselves because the cost of maintaining the property is ridiculous, right? So think about that next time somebody tells you that real estate is a perfect path. It is not fucking easy. A lot of the people who earn real estate at some point, unfortunately, have to give it out because they just can't handle the stress, right? Too much involved, too much risk involved, right? Very little reward. I mean, you account from things from property taxes, which are subject to governments saying you're too rich or not, right? I mean, utilities that keep getting more expensive for some reason, right? And then you got other things like insurance, which is so over the top that you don't even know if it's worth it, right? There's too much risk involved in owning insurance as well, because insurance doesn't like to lose money. And if they have disaster after disaster after disaster, they raise your prices, right? Tenants, let's say, break the property, then they have to file a claim with the insurance company. They'll raise your rates then, right? There's all these kinds of pieces that come into together. So hear me out very clearly. Do not invest in real estate unless you have extremely good flowing income, because you are going to be forking over a lot of money over the years. Be wary of it. There's a lot at stake in real estate. Now, investing in real estate, you could do it to third hands, silent investing. That's all possible. But you owning a property, beware. There's too much risk involved, very little reward. I'm telling you honestly from experience. Don't take the wrong path that I did. Can it work for a lot of people? Even if they like, fuck this guy, right? Doesn't know what he's talking about. Sure, right? I know plenty of success stories. But again, real estate is not for the faint of heart. I mean, I've had literally bills that come in front of me once that was 40 grand. I was like, I don't have 40 grand to fork over, right? Now I have to take a personal loan that is going to make me poor again for no reason, right? So think about that. Risk involved, huge amount of risk. Things break all the time. Don't take it for granted. And anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's my rant about investing. Do with it what you will. I do hope you have learned something invaluable from it. Otherwise, I wouldn't say this. But I could go on a rant over and over, sometimes repeating exactly what I said. But it is what it is, There's frustration involved. There is understanding. There's learning. But I hope it was valuable for you. And have a great night. God bless all of you. And may Christ be with all of you. Thank you so much.